Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, derbiologist, and joining me again is Capping with Candace. Candace here. Candace, we begin season number 2 of Down to the Wire, and this year we're going to kind of stay focused more on selections and try to key up, kind of have it into 2 seasons. One, we're going to kind of have a run up to the Triple Crown races and through the Belmont Stakes, and then we'll kind of turn around and focus in on the road to the Breeders' Cup. We will still be highlighting some of the major Grade 1 races as we move along and some of the big days. But again, our focus on the first half of the year will be on the 3-year-olds. And we're going to start right away with the 6th race at Aqueduct on Saturday. And this race, I thought, came up very competitive from a pedigree standpoint, and also a lot of big name trainers in this race.
Yeah, I agree. When I first looked at it, I thought, well, there was an obvious standout in the Pletcher Repul Trainee by Indian Charlie out of an Unbridled Song mare has been throwing out some very, very fast works down at Palm Beach Downs, and we know how Pletcher first-time starters do. If you look to go against this one, he is drawn out wide, so perhaps you have reason to, then this becomes a pretty tricky race. For me personally, I'm going to go against the Pletcher horse. I do expect it to run very well. Indian Charlies do tend to do well. First time out, I think they've won about 19% of the time first time out this year. It's going to be a tough one to beat, but I expect this horse to be sent from the wide whip draw. And I think there's going to be speed from a couple other horses here. And for that reason, I'm going to go against him. Another interesting one here is down on the rail is a Looking at Lucky Half to Intense Holiday. I also expect this horse to make good representation of himself first time out, but I wonder if he ultimately wants further than this, and if 6 furlongs would be a little bit short. I expect him to run well, but maybe we'll get him in, a mile, main special weight next time out, and perhaps then he'll be much more of a win threat. For me, I'm really interested in a couple here. One of them is Instructor Kuno. This is a guy who's come close a couple times in a row, and last time out he finished second to NASA, who we'll see later on in the card and who's pretty well regarded in his own right. The only reason I won't take him on top is because he had a significant jump in speed figure ratings when he finished second to NASA, but that was over a sloppy track. So I don't know if he jumped because it was his 3rd career start or if it was the sloppy track itself, and I'm a little concerned that it might have been because of the sloppy track. Ultimately, I'm going to go with a little bit of a stab here, and I'm going to go with Maybe a Diamond. This is by Congrats out of the Cherokee Run mare. Bruce Brown doesn't win a ton first time out, but when he does, they tend to kind of be bombs. This horse seems to be working well, a couple pretty fast works over at Belmont, so I expect him to run well first time out. Congrats does pretty good first time out. I think they win about 15% of the time, and I saw the footage of this horse from OBS March where it sold for $155,000, and pretty much like what I saw there as well. So I think Maybe a Diamond could be one that at a big price could perhaps run well here, and I think that's kind of how you have to approach this race when you're going to have a couple horses that are going to take a lot of money. The only other one I could really have here is Madruz, who's on the far outside, only because he's taken a lot of money in all of his starts, but perhaps with the Pletcher horse in here, he'll actually be a playable price for once. And he does get blinkers on, which McLaughlin does well with, and he's also going around to sprint. So both those angles are angles that Kieran McLaughlin does really well with. And if he's any sort of a price, which I expect him to be, then he's worth using in this kind of a spot. Very well regarded, was a $360,000 purchase at Keeneland September, also by Indian Charlie out of a Melbourne Moon mare. So I'm looking at Maybe a Diamond on top, perhaps using Madruz if he's any sort of a playable price, which I'd expect him to be. The Pletcher horse is going to be tough, but I'm going to try to beat him here.
I like your point on Bruce Brown. When he does win, he does tend to get some prices on some of his horses, and especially in some of these New York maiden races where he is pretty much stabled year round. I kind of broke this field up into 2 groups, the horses that have ran and then the horses that are making their debut. Now, of the horses that have ran, I noticed one of the horses on the outside, Mandolin Wins, and he had faced El Campare and Leave the Light On and Daredevil, kind of some heavy hitters in his first 3 races. So he kind of interesting. And he ran evenly in a couple of those races. And then we also know that Daredevil race really was a good race. It was in the mud. So I think he has the potential to maybe improve a little bit. Ultimately, I ended up going with the horse at the rail here. 3 main reasons why I like Money Multiplier in this race. One, I was a big fan of looking at Lucky. He was a smaller horse who was very precocious. He won early, had a solid juvenile campaign, and this is his first crop of foals, and he's had some horses win early on. Also, Chad Brown is good with first-time starters. They paid some good money for this horse, $260,000. But also the owners of this horse, I like to refer to them as the banker boys. They're bankers from New York, the Klarovich stable, and they've had a lot of nice horses. They actually have their horses with multiple trainers. So I ended up going with Money Multiplier. And then on the outside, I like Mandolin Winds just because he ran evenly. And I really like the company line of the 2 horses that he's faced.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely couldn't put you off of Money Multiplier. I agree. Looking at Lucky, his first crop, they've done very well, first time starter wise. I just wonder if with that unbridled song underneath, if perhaps he's ultimately going to want further. Being a half to Intense Holiday, I do remember Intense Holiday ran in a sprint first time out, struggled a little bit, came back in a mile and won well. So I wonder if this horse is going to want a little bit further than this.
Should be an interesting race to watch. Also, Linda Rice has a couple of horses in there, including a Tappet. So I definitely think it's going to be a race to take some trip notes on. The second race of our 3-race preview today is the Jerome Stakes. So last year, Noble Moon won this in a small field. A few more horses this year, and a couple of horses that I was expecting to enter did not ultimately enter this race. So I don't know if they just changed their mind at the last minute, but a solid field, and the horse that will probably be favored drew on the outside, El Kabir.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting race, especially from a pace standpoint. El Kabir was impressive over at Churchill Downs last time out, beating Imperia and Eagle, both of whom I think are pretty well regarded. This distance is right up his alley. I think, that mile and the 16th of the Kentucky Jockey Club, he kind of blew up at the end. So, cutting back just a little bit is probably going to help him here. I think he's probably the one horse in here who you look at and you think is a tried and true miler. I don't expect him to progress at distances further than this, but this distance is right up his alley. The problem I think he's going to have is he's going to have to go to the lead from here, and he is a horse who's tended to run on the lead as it is. And there is speed in this field from other spots. General Bellamy has won wire to wire before. Now We Are Free has early speed. NASA showed some early speed last time out. So I wonder if we can get a contested pace in this race. And if we can, I'm really intrigued by a horse named Accurate. He's won 2 out of 3. He won his debut. He came back in a stakes race and just kind of struggled, wasn't ready yet. And then, wheeled back in an allowance at Parks. That was over a wet fast track, but he was really impressive there. I thought he, seemed very mature. He was running in between horses. And then when, it kind of got contested up front, he pulled back, sat behind them, and made a very nice three-wide move and drew away. I think that kind of a move is what you're going to want here, especially if we do get somewhat of a contested pace. This will be his first time routing. Rudy Rodriguez does well sprinter route. His pedigree suggests he'd want it with that touch gold underneath as well. So Accurate, I think, he's not really a big name in this field, and maybe a horse that a lot of people haven't heard so much of, but I think that this is a race where he could really be well suited. He gets Irad Ortiz aboard, and that's one of the best jockey trainer combos around.
Yeah, one of the things I think I learned last year, and over the years, the game has changed a little bit. Last year we saw a lot of morning lines that were kind of, and I don't want to say they were bad morning lines. I just think anymore, with all of this money coming nationally, you never really know where the money is going to come from. So this year I'm going to focus more in on, handicap the race, don't necessarily look at the morning line, and then just try to pick the horses. So I quickly got it down to 3 horses in this race. I was impressed by El Kabir the last time. I thought after chasing Blofeld the race before, I thought maybe he'd exposed some distance limitations. Ultimately, I don't think he's going to be a 10 furlong Derby type horse, but I think he's sharp. Also, he worked out 6 furlongs and 4 furlongs in his last 2 workouts since that race, which to me indicates I think they're really trying to win this race. So I think he's, especially with Kelvin Burrell on the outside, that helps him. Also, Ostrolenka impressed me with a couple of back-to-back wins. The son of Musket Man, who ran 4th in the Kentucky Derby, didn't really run much in the Remsen, but he had an outside post. And I think if we remember that day, the 3 main contenders in that race all drew outside, and then there was a big inside rail bias. So I'm just going to toss that race, and I think his other 2 races are competitive. I think another horse that woke up in his last race was General Bellamy. He had kind of 2 kind of just medium efforts, and then he really exploded that last race. And then when you look at the trainer of this horse, Bill Mott, to me that says maybe those first 2 races were more like conditioning races, and now he may have found a kind of a true level of ability. I think 7-5 is fair value on El Kabir. I'm going to pick him just because I really think he is the most meant horse for this race. But I do have concerns that he is distance challenged. And like you say, if you get a contested pace from NASA or Ostrolenka, things could change in a hurry.
Yeah, for me, that's probably what I'm most worried about. If I was, playing doubles, pick threes, I would absolutely use El Kabir because, like you say, he is very well much in this spot. And if he does have distance limitations, like I think both of you and I think is possible, then you're trying to win now, for definitely. So I will be using Accurate on top. I'll also use El Kabir, like I said, in those doubles, pick threes. The other one I would use is Royal Burr, the other Pletcher horse, not Ostrolenka. Um, Royal Burr to me, he was I really liked him at Keeneland in his debut race, which he won well over a pretty nice field. A couple horses came back and won out of that race. And he also was in the Remsen, which, as you say, was a crazy race. And he bobbled at the start, and basically it was over from there. I mean, in that race, there was such a speed rail bias in that race. So I'm willing to toss that effort for him. This is his 3rd career start coming up here as well. So, for me, I like Accurate on top, but I'll use El Kabir and Royal Burr as well.
All right, and I think really the key to that race is how much pressure goes on El Kabir in the first half mile. But I actually think it's a plus having Kelvin Burrell, who rode him the last time. And from the outside, he can kind of go to whichever part of the track. And we know that surface at Aqueduct in the winter can change very dramatically. So that's actually a good spot for El Kabir. The 3rd and final race is the Mucho Macho Man. It's got a new name this year. Last year it was run on New Year's Day. Thrilling rendition last year. And this year I thought a good solid field. Again, we're not necessarily looking at Derby contenders per se. Really, to me, what you do is kind of horses just kind of start eliminating themselves in races like this. What are some of your thoughts going into this Mucho Macho Man race?
This is another race where I see perhaps some speed. You look at a horse like Amy's Flatter, Bluegrass Singer, A-Rod again, maybe we'll slot in right behind them. Honest, or all those horses have shown speed so far, and that's what we're going to see a lot of in these early season races. I mean, many of these horses have only ran once or twice, and just, what happens with the 2-year-olds we see, the ones that win often are ones that are sent to the lead and they just draw away. So, whether that pace scenario will actually formalize here, we'll see. But there's potential for, a pretty good contested pace up front. Regardless of that, though, I'm going to go with Mathuk, the Shadwell entry here. He breaks from the outside, but I think he's just the speed of the speed in this race. And, he has a great pedigree, distorted humor for More Than Ready Mare. Ready's gal. He's half sibling to a Super Derby winner, so the pedigree is definitely there. He took a ton of money last time out and was extremely impressive in there. Despite pulling a little bit early, he just was the winner the whole way and won by 10.5 lengths. Maybe the query on him is that he's never run over a dry track, so this will be the first time that he tackles that, but I'm not too worried about that at all. And he's first time lane 6 in here, so I just think from that outside post, to send him to the lead, I think he has the speed of the speed, and you just let him run away with it here.
Competitive field, I think there's some speed, and there's also some good stalkers, and also some well-bred horses. Matuk is definitely on my short list of what I considered some horses with the pedigree to actually, possibly make it to the Kentucky Derby. At first, after that last race, I heard talk of looking for an allowance, but then I think they realized you're not going to get too many allowance non-winners of 2 to fill at Gulfstream. So you either have to step up or you have to run at a place like Tampa Bay or something like that. So I've been very impressed with both of his races. He's a full brother to Machen, and Machen won the Derby trial and ran in a series of races at the fairgrounds. I think the horse is very talented. I'm going to go with Amy's Flatter. The reason why I went with this horse is even though it won on the poly track, it definitely has a dirt pedigree. And this trainer does very well with young horses. And this owner also does well with this trainer. And they brought down horses over the years down to the fairgrounds in Gulfstream. And they win at prices. But I really just like the way this horse is working out. 5 workouts over the Palmetto surface and a dirt pedigree, and the fact that he won at 7 furlongs that first race. I do think Mathuk is the better horse, but I'm going to pick Amy's Flatter. And I also think the price will be right, 7 or 8 to 1. And another horse is A-Rod again. Same breeder, trainer, owner, and connections last year as General A-Rod. And I thought an impressive victory. They ran evenly at Keeneland, and then they kind of made a sweeping move at Churchill and drew off impressively in that race. But I think the overlay possibly could be Amy's Flatter, and you just don't know. I always like that poly to dirt bounce.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Amy's Flatter because when I initially looked at this race, I simplified it down to 3 horses with Mathuk being on top. The others were Amy's Flatter. And then I also liked Juan and Bina, who's an Indian Charlie half to Gold Hawk, who we remember around this time of the year last year, has run really well. Won on debut, finished second to Mr. Jordan, who's been pretty impressive to this point over at Gulfstream Park West. So, Juan and Bina is perhaps another one that we can see we have the pedigree and some competitive performances, to back that up. But I think this is a really competitive race, and perhaps I'm more interested in this race than the Jerome itself, even though that's the one that gets us points. But I think here we have equally as many great pedigrees and really nice performances to date from some of these youngsters.
So far Gulfstream has been playing very fair. But you can also always get that afternoon rain shower. I'm really hoping Matuk runs a good race because I want to see him on a dry track. I just, the only reason why I'm not picking him is just it worries me that he caught a sloppy track twice. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder about, when horses run over that first 2 times, like now if he thinks that's normal and he, but he's been obviously been bet very hard, and pedigree is there, and the connections have been strong recently with 2-year-olds. What do you think kind of is the key to this race for Matuk to win it? Do you want him on the lead? Do you want him from off the pace? How do you see the race unfolding?
I want him on the lead. I think the key for him is going to be that first quarter. How does he react? His first race, he had trouble coming out the break. He cannot have that here. And in his most recent race, even though it was a really easy win, he was pulling quite a bit and was very headstrong in the beginning. So those are things that against better company, he's not going to be able to get away with here. So, you're going to want a clean break, and, mentally he needs to be well within himself in this race. I wouldn't want to see him, pulling himself into a contested pace if somebody else was sent or anything like that. I think the biggest key for him is just mentally that, he's very composed in this spot, because I do think talent-wise, pedigree-wise, he is really a standout in this field.
Should be an exciting race. And yeah, I think both Amy's Flatter and Matuk are definitely horses down the road that have a little bit of potential to stay on the Triple Crown trail. The Jerome Stakes, I think El Kabir will be the horse that'll be bet pretty hard. I put him at about 7 to 5 fair odds. And I got Matuk at 2 to 1 fair odds. I just don't think he's going to be that price. So it might be more of a race where I'll just have to play some of the other horses and really watch. But if I don't get my price in some of the other races, I'll just have to wait for another day. Now, next week we have the Sham Stakes, and then we're only 2 weeks away from the LeCompte Stakes as we try to focus in here in the next few weeks on our second season of Down to the Wire. That's going to do it for another edition, Capping with Candace and Derbyologist.com, our blogs. And good luck to everybody, and we'll see you next week on Down to the Wire.